All right, now it's recording. We're going to talk about networking threats, assessments, and defenses. It's a little bit more interesting. Okay, so attacks on networks. Threat actors place a high priority on targeting networks in their attacks. Exploiting a single network vulnerability can expose hundreds or thousands of devices. Attacks that target a network or a process that relies on a network include interception attacks, layer 2 attacks, DNS attacks, distributed denial of service attacks, also called DDoS, malicious coding, and scripting attacks. Interception attacks. So what they're talking there are the man in the middle, or MITM. That's when your threat actor is positioned in a communication between two parties. The goal is to eavesdrop on the conversation or impersonate one of the two parties. So a typical MITM attack has two phases. The first is intercepting their traffic, and the second phase is decrypting your transmission. And depending on the type of the man in the middle attack, you can even have a third phase, and that is they can pose as like, say you have a communication between point A and point B, and they can catch everything between point A and point B and then pretend to be one of those. It's in order to get more information. Okay, so this is just a basic graphic of what that looks like. Then there's session replay attacks. A replay attack, and if you don't understand these, please stop me. A replay attack makes a copy of legitimate transmission before sending it to the recipient. The attacker uses the copy at a later time. So they do like login credentials and things like that. Threat actors use several techniques for stealing active session IDs. Network attacks, these hijack and altered communications between two users. And then there's endpoint attacks, cross-site scripting, Trojans, and malicious JavaScript coding. You remember we kind of talked a little bit about this one when we were talking about, they had like the little graphic where they showed the fake looking website, but they waited till the person had actually legitimately logged into their bank account and then made it look like that's what they were sending, but they were actually sending someone else their credentials. Man in the browser. This attack intercepts communications between parties to steal or manipulate the data. It occurs between browser and underlying computer. The MITB attack usually begins with a Trojan infecting the computer and installing an extension into the browser configuration. This is why you have to be very careful about extensions. When the browser's launched, the extension is activated. Extension waits for a specific web page in which a user enters information such as account number and password for a financial institution. When users click submit, the extension captures all the data from the fields on the form, and sometimes it'll even modify your data. The advantage: most of these attacks are distributed through a Trojan browser extension, making it difficult to recognize that malicious code has been installed. An infected MITB browser might remain dormant for months until it's triggered by the user visiting a targeted website. And MITB software resides exclusively within the web browser, making it difficult for standard anti-malware software to detect it. Now, I will say that most often that I ran into this were the ones where they rerouted the search engine via the extension. So you'd plug in the extension, it'd reroute your search engine. Well, while it was doing that, it was also taking all of your, it was acting like a keylogger. And because you said, yeah, it's okay, you can install this extension, the normal antivirus software was like, whoa, something's going on, but I don't know where it's coming from. So unless you knew what to look for, you had to go in and manually remove them and check all the different places.
I was going to say, if you went in and you manually removed the extensions, would that solve the issue?
Yes, but you have, what I usually did with them is I would go through and look at all of the extensions, because usually if there was one, they'd have secondaries. So I'd go in and be like, do you recognize this one? And because we'd have ones that were installed by the school district, which is where I saw this one. And then we'd have ones that were installed by the person. So the ones that were installed by the school district had like a little icon next to them that said, your enterprise installed this. So I'm like, okay, those are all us. And then I go, did you install this? Did you install this? And, you know, it made the person uncomfortable because they're like, I didn't do anything. You know how the end user is. I didn't touch nothing. So, and even if they had installed it, I would say, okay, why? And I would walk through stuff with them. But usually, even if you had one of those extensions, after it got used once or twice, you'd find 2 or 3 more hidden in there too. But once you got all of them cleared out, after you got the extensions cleared out, I'd run something like malware bytes just for cookies and things like that. And then it would get everything.
Okay, thank you.
No problem. Layer 2 attacks. The OSI reference model separates networking steps into a series of 7 layers. Within each layer, different networking tasks are performed that cooperate with the tasks in the layers immediately above and below. So layer 2, the data link layer, is responsible for dividing the data into packets. A compromise at layer 2 can affect the entire communication. Address resolution protocol poisoning. If the IP address for a device is known, but the MAC address is not, the sending computer sends an address resolution protocol or ARP packet to determine the MAC address. MAC addresses are stored in an ARP cache for future reference. ARP poisoning relies upon MAC spoofing, which is imitating another computer by means of changing the MAC address. And this used to be a lot harder, but now there are all sorts of programs that you can use to do this. Media access control attacks. Other attacks manipulate MAC addresses through spoofing. 2 common attacks involving spoofing MAC addresses are MAC cloning and MAC flooding. So MAC cloning is pretty much exactly what it sounds like. Threat actors discover a valid MAC address of a device connected to a switch. They then spoof that address on, spoof the MAC address on, and then switch changes its MAC address table to reflect the MAC address with the port to which the attacker's device is connected. So the MAC flooding attack, it's based on spoofing. MAC cloning and MAC address table of the switch. What they do here is the actor overflows the switch with Ethernet packets that have been spoofed so that every packet contains a different source MAC address. So that usually if you see flooding attack, it's exactly what it is. It's just flooding some sort of receiver, like if it's a memory flood, or it's just overpowering it so that it has no idea what to do with all of that information.
Quick question on those. For the cloning, it seems, at least the way when I'm thinking about it, and I don't know if this is right, but cloning seems kind of like a way to get in versus flooding seems like you're already in and they just want to destroy stuff.
It can be. Flooding can also have the, depending on how remember me talking about, you always want to make sure that your defaults are set correctly. Well, if you have your defaults set really weird on certain switches, some of them, when they get flooded, it shuts off their security, basically. So
that seems like a
it's a really dumb thing, which is why people need to learn how to work with their switches and know what switches do what and which ports do what, because you can accidentally set it so that if it doesn't know what to do in an attack like this, it basically shuts off, and then you flood it and it becomes it almost works like a router instead of a switch after that, and then just sprays stuff everywhere. So
okay.
It's pretty awful. But yeah, that is what it would be doing, unless you have someone that has an incorrectly configured switch. All right, DNS attacks. So domain name system is DNS, is hierarchical name system for matching computer names and IP addresses. DNS-based attack substitutes a DNS address so that computer is silently redirected to a different device. A successful DNS attack has two consequences: URL redirection and domain reputation. So attacks using DNS include DNS poisoning and DNS hijacking. DNS poisoning modifies a local lookup table on a device to point to a different domain. Two locations for DNS poisoning are the local host table and your external DNS server. DNS hijacking is intended to infect an external DNS server with IP addresses that point to malicious sites. DNS hijacking has the advantage of redirecting all users accessing the server. Attackers attempt to exploit a protocol flaw and convince authentic DNS server to accept fraudulent DNS entries sent from the attacker's DNS server. If the DNS server does not correctly validate DNS responses to ensure they have come from an authoritative source, remember us talking about certificates? That's what they're talking about with the authoritative source. It stores the fraudulent entries locally and serves them to the users. This spreads them to other DNS servers. So this is what your DNS attack looks like. So one, your attacker's computer. What's the address of evil.net? Please send the IP address of evil.net. Here are the addresses. And then your valids are what is the good one? And then it starts giving the attacker's address instead. Does that make sense? DNS poisoning and hijacking is actually very common, at least attempted to be very common attack that people use on websites. Any questions on that? Okay, now this one you guys have probably heard of multiple times. So the DDoS, distributed denial of service attacks. Originally, there was just the denial of service attack, and that is deliberately attempting to prevent authorized, and remember that keyword, authorized users from accessing a system by overwhelming it with requests. Most DOS attacks today are DDoSs, which are the distributed, using hundreds or thousands of devices flooding the server with requests. Because if you just had one, most of us have fairly easily, our server settings can now say, okay, you know, stop it, we can stop that. But when you have hundreds or thousands, it's a lot harder to stop. The devices participating in a DDoS attack are infected and controlled by threat actors, so that users are completely unaware that their endpoints are part of a DDoS attack. So that's, remember when we talked about botnets? That's what they use to perpetrate these.
And what's the largest one on record currently for DDoS attacks?
I'm not sure. I know that the largest, I don't know the exact numbers, but there was one where they had been using IoT devices as well as like computers and things like that. And that one, if I remember correctly, had millions, if I remember, of devices in its botnet. And the biggest problem they ran into was it was basically a botnet for hire at that point. And it was insane. They were targeting large scale companies at that point, and it took some large providers banding together to eventually go after them. And I believe the people that perpetrated it were actually, the group was actually caught. I'm not sure if they were prosecuted or what country they were in, because you know what country they were in really depends a lot. I'll have to look it up and see what the actual numbers were for you, but that one was a couple years ago. And as far as I know, that was the largest one. And it was because they were scooping up all those infected IoT devices and using those in the botnet as well. So oh, did you get something on Cengage, Jeff? Sorry.
Yeah, I did. It's just an update on like ways to make it go faster, I guess.
Ah,
So,
okay. Well,
I
thank
don't
you
know
for
if it's
sharing
true.
that. I don't know if we'll have to give it a try and see if it actually works.
Yeah, exactly.
you guys go ahead and give it a try. I'll give it a try on my end too and see if, let me know for you guys if it actually works. If it doesn't, let me know. And I will say, hey, this is what Cengage gave us. And no, it does not actually work. So give it a try and let me know. Okay, guys? Thanks for that, Jeff. Okay, next we are on to malicious coding and scripting attacks. These I find very fascinating because they have to put a lot into these. So some network attacks come from malicious software code and scripting. These use PowerShell, Visual Basic for applications, other coding languages like Python, Linux, Unix, Bash. You can see them in all sorts of different flavors. PowerShell is a task automation and configuration management framework from Microsoft. Administrative tasks are performed by commandlets, which are specialized .NET classes that implement a specific operation. PowerShell allows attackers to inject code from the PowerShell environment into other processes without first storing any malicious code on the hard disk. Commands can then be executed by bypassing security protections and leave no evidence behind. Personally, I think PowerShell are the most scary, because if they actually know what they're doing with PowerShell and the victim is not hardened against injection from this, it's pretty difficult to even see that that's happened. VBA, which is Visual Basic Application, is an event-driven Microsoft programming language. It's most often used to create macros, which are used to automate complex tasks or repeated series of tasks. Macros, they date back to the 90s, but continue to be key attack vectors. Due to the impact of macro malware, Microsoft has implemented several protections. That's why you see those protected view, trusted documents, trusted locations. Whenever you open something in Word, it's like, are you sure you want to enable editing? Macros are the reason for that. It's because people started sending what looked like normal documents and they had macros attached to them because it's quite easy to do. Python. Python's a popular programming language, and we actually teach classes in it, that can run on several OS platforms. There are several best practices to follow when using Python so that the code does not contain vulnerabilities. Use the latest version of Python, stay current on vulnerabilities within Python, be careful when formatting strings in Python, and don't download only vetted Python libraries. That last one really should go for any programming language, but you would be surprised how many people ignore that. Bash, and this comes from my programming experience. Bash is the command language interpreter for Linux Unix operating system. Bash scripting is using Bash to create a script. Exploits have taken advantage of vulnerabilities in Bash. So really, in the security, it's a good idea to have at least a little understanding of some form of programming language. I come from a web background, so the one that I had the most experience with was ASP.NET, C#. I've done a little bit with VBA, a little bit with PowerShell. Anytime you have to do any sort of network administration, Bash, because we do it with our Linux, Kali Linux and anything like that. Python, I am not as familiar with. In fact, that's one I'd like to take classes on. But the thing about security is the more you can reach out, the more you can understand, the better your background is. Yeah, I've heard it's really, really fun. So it's just one of those. I have multiple things that I have to do. I have to study for certification exams too. I actually have 2 I'm working on right now. So I have to figure out which one I want to do first. So yes, I'm actually doing the updated computer hacking forensic investigator. And because I teach the Security Plus, I figure if I'm going to be teaching any certifications, it's only fair that I have them so I know what you guys go through. Okay, knowledge check. In what type of attack is the threat actor positioned between 2 parties and alters the transmission to eavesdrop or impersonate one of the parties? MITB, map cloning, MITM, or session replay. Technically, you're right on both because but I think that they want C. Yeah. Because A technically is you're in the middle, but it's with a browser. But technically, the way they worded this, you could be both. Okay, tools for assessment and defense. Several assessment tools determine the strength of a network. Other tools can be used to create a stronger network defense. Both types of tools can be categorized into network reconnaissance and discovery tools, Linux file manipulation tools, and packet capture and replay tools. Okay, so here are some names, sources, and descriptions. There's the Harvester. This one's on Kali Linux. Provides information about email accounts, usernames, host names, subdomains from different public sources. DNS enum, that's on Kali Linux. This one lists DNS information of a domain. It's really not that hard to use either. Sniper, Zero Security. This is a penetration testing tool. Cuckoo by Cuckoo, automated malware analysis system. Nessus, which is created by Tenable. This is a vulnerability assessment tool. Any of them by Tenable. Tenable makes some great products. Hopefully you cannot hear my really loud cat in the background. Hold on one second. Judicious application of canned air. Okay, so Nessus is a good one. Scanless by, I think I cannot pronounce that one. VESCH, this is a tool for websites and port scans. And Nmap, I can guarantee that you're going to be using that at some point. There's also another version called ZenMap, which you can use as well. Linux file manipulation tools. There's Headtailcat, grep, chmod, and logger. And these are all ones. So head displays the first 10 lines of a file. Tail displays the last 10. Cat displays an entire file. Grep, remember that one. I can guarantee you're going to be using that. Search for a keyword. And chmod changes your file's permissions. That's also when you're going to use logger adds content to a syslog file. Scripting tools are used to create scripts to facilitate tasks. It's a good idea to learn some form of a scripting tool just to help yourself out. PowerShell is one of the most popular ones and most powerful scripting tools. Scripts can also be created when using Secure Shell or SSH. OpenSSL is another tool that supports scripting. It's a cryptography library that offers open source applications of the TLS protocol. And I've used OpenSSL and it's actually pretty good too. Packet capture and replay tools. Okay, this is really good. And I can guarantee you will learn how to use some of these too. Collecting and analyzing data packets that cross a network can provide valuable information. Packet analysis typically examines the entire contents of the packet, which can be used extensively for security. You can detect unusual behavior that could indicate the presence of malware, search for unusual domains or IP address endpoints, and discover regular connections to a threat actor's command and control server. Wireshark is a popular GUI packet capture and analysis tool. TCP dump is a command line packet analyzer, and TCP replay is a tool for editing packets and then replaying the packets back onto the network to observe their behavior. So on that one, it's kind of, okay, let's see if we can change this thing and throw it back out there and see what it does. I have not used that one as much because I'm not a network administrator by trade, but Wireshark and TCP dump I have used. This is what Wireshark looks like. And it is a heck of a lot of fun. It can be a little bit frustrating at first because you get so much data. But once you figure out what goes where, it is a great tool. Now, if you are interested, let me know. One of the many Humble Bundle book things that I downloaded had Wireshark stuff in it, and I would be willing to post PDFs of that if you guys want some free books. Knowledge check. Which of the following GUI tool that uses capture and is used to capture and analyze packets? And we just talked about this. TCP dump, PowerShell, TCP replay, or Wireshark. So we got one yes, please on that. Okay. Okay. Like I made the point of saying GUI. Yep, Wireshark's the only one of those that was a GUI. Physical security controls. A lot of people forget that cybersecurity has to deal with physical security. So that's part of our program too. Physical security involves preventing a threat actor from physically accessing your network. Physical security controls include external perimeter defenses, internal physical security controls, and computer hardware security. External perimeter defenses. Industrial camouflage is an attempt to make the physical presence of the building as nondescript as possible. When camouflage is not possible, external perimeter defenses must be used. Barriers act as passive security devices. Fencing is usually a permanent structure that keeps unauthorized personnel out. It's usually accompanied by by signage that explains the area is restricted. Barricades are generally designed to block the passage of traffic, but not designed to keep out individuals. And bollards, I can guarantee some question somewhere is going to ask you, what's a bollard? These are the short but sturdy vertical posts that are used as a vehicular traffic barricade to prevent a car from ramming into a secured area. You'll see them in front of like convenience stores and stuff too, like preventing cars from accidentally running into the front of stores. Those are bollards. And yes, I had to answer a question on a certification exam about that. Exactly. That's why I know what they are. Personnel. Human security guards who patrol and monitor restricted areas are most often used as active security defenses. In settings that require high level of protection, 2 security guards may be required. Some guards are responsible for monitoring activity captured by video surveillance cameras that transmit a signal to a specific and limited set of receivers called closed circuit television or CCTV. Drones, also called unmanned aerial vehicles, UAVs, include cameras for monitoring activity. Robot sentries that patrol and use CCTV with object detection are increasingly being used in public areas because it's a little bit easier than people sometimes, especially if you're out in the middle of the nowhere or that it's inclement weather type places. Then you have sensors to supplement the work of security guards. Sensors can be placed in strategic locations to alert guards by generating audible alarms of an unexpected or unusual action.
My favorite are the variations, or how many variations of wireless trail cameras are basically used.
Yeah, it's amazing. I think it's funny though. I mean, I don't know if you guys have one down there. We have an FBI center here. Do you guys have something like that out there? I think
they have one over by the VA, if I remember right.
Okay, I know I've been out to the military base out in, oh, I can't remember. It's close to you guys.
If it's Air Force, it's Mountain Home.
It's not Mountain Home.
And if then it's Gowan, right outside of Boise.
Yes. I had to stay at Gowan because they didn't have any. I was doing an audit for the state police, and they had a whole huge class in at the Idaho State Police Barracks. So they had us at the Gowan Field Barracks. So if you want to see a good example of what physical security looks like on something like that, go look at I would not suggest very slowly driving in front of these places because you will get a nice visit or you'll get pulled over, depending on the areas you're in. But you can see the fences, you can see the guard stations, you can see all of the things that we're talking about. Like the FBI has these, it's been interesting to watch how it's changed over the years because they've increased the number of personnel because it's turned into a large data center here now where they do a lot of cybersecurity crime stuff. And so when they started pulling in more stuff like the big fiber lines and things, you started seeing bigger walls, and then they had those big steel barricade things that raise and lower behind cars, so they basically pin them in place. So it's very interesting to see how things like that change. Next, internal physical security controls. So internal physical access security controls are locks, secure areas, protected cable distribution, that's a big one, and fire suppression. Locks. Physical locks require a key or other device to open doors or cabinets. Electronic locks use buttons that must be pushed in the proper sequence to open the door. Smart locks use a smartphone to send a code via wireless Bluetooth to open a door, or you have fingerprint locks or other types of biometrics that you use to scan the person's identity. There's the secure areas, the DMZ, the demilitarized zone in cybersecurity is an area that separates threat actors from defenders. A man trap, in fact, this one is now in pretty much all schools. You have to go through a man trap. It's something they've done to reduce the amount of school shootings in United States schools. I'm not sure how well it works because people really don't pay attention to how it's supposed to work, in my experience. But it's an air gap to separate a non-secure area from a secured area. Usually there's two different doors that you open, you go through one door, you get in between the two, and usually if it's done correctly, the persons check your ID, and then they'll let you through into the secure area. Unfortunately, I've seen a lot of places where they don't train people, and you get in that first door and they just hit the button immediately and they don't even check. So it's kind of sad. Another area that must be secure is your data center that houses on-prem networks, servers, and storage equipment. So this is just a graphic example of what your man trap looks like. But if you go in any Idaho school building, at least here, I think they're like that in your area. When you come through the front door, it looks like this now, basically.
If you wanted to see a good example of a DMZ, Camp Williams, it's a National Guard base in Utah. They have a data center you can see it from the camp, but it's got a double row of fences separated by like 800-900 yards, and it's just all open shrub ground, and it belongs to no such agency that just collects and monitors data passively. But like the first gate you can get through it, there's no one manning the gate, but it's an electronic, it looked like an electronic swipe gate. This was back in 2014. And then you can see multiple roving patrols, and you can just watch them. Yeah, because it's,
so they actually knew what they were doing when they were doing it.
Well, I mean, it's the NSA. They're kind of attentive about
their
security.
stuff is definitely higher than the average Joe. Yeah. That's a good example. Yeah. And their buildings and contractors from the big letter agencies, a lot of times people don't even know unless they have the seal on them that those buildings are there. They prefer that security through obscurity thing that's been used a lot by NSA, CIA, FBI for their buildings, because it just puts less of a mark on their personnel. Protected cable distribution. I'm going to make a big deal about this because people do not pay attention to it. Protected cable distribution is a system of cable conduits used to protect classified information that's being transmitted between two secure areas. Two types of PDs are commonly used. There's the hardened carrier PDS. The data cables are installed in a conduit constructed of special electrical metallic tubing, and all connections between segments are permanently sealed with welds or special sealant. In alarmed carrier PDS, the carrier system is deployed with specialized optical fibers in the conduit that can sense acoustic vibrations that occur when an intruder attempts to gain access to the cables. Now, a lot of times people don't think about the data cables that transmit the data. I have seen, they're like, yeah, we've got our secured network closets, and then they've got their major cables hanging literally out of the ceiling. So please, if you work somewhere and you're doing a security sweep, make a point of looking at all of your network cables. Fire suppression, this is another big one. And if you're working in a data center, make sure you know what type of fire suppression system you're using, because there are some of them you don't want to be anywhere around when they go off, because they suck the oxygen out of the air, and that's how they kill the fire. In data centers containing electronic equipment, using water or handheld fire extinguishers are not recommended because it can destroy your equipment. Stationary fire suppression systems are integrated into the building's infrastructure and release fire suppressants. They can be classified as dry chemical systems that disperse a fine, dry powder over the fire, clean agent systems that extinguish a fire by reducing heat, removing or isolating oxygen, or inhibiting the chemical reaction. Now, the problem about those clean agent systems, I've worked in a couple environments with those. Removing or isolating oxygen means if you're there when they go off, they usually give a warning, you're dead. So pay attention to those. Yeah, exactly. Don't be inside when they go off. Exactly. Because I've worked in two different places, one of which was when I was working in a wafer fabrication facility, and they had to make a big point of telling us, because I was working with next to acid baths, and they said, if this alarm goes off, do not stand in front of it, because it will spray this down, and then you'll get a nice bath in caustic acid, as well as getting the halon, which is one of the ones that sucks the oxygen out of the air. So you'll get an acid bath and you won't be able to breathe because the oxygen is removed from the system. So that one scared the crap out of me. And the data center was an entire data center that used halon suppressors, which are the ones that, yeah, they can be really scary. So just arm yourself with knowledge is my key point here. You don't have to be terrified, but arm yourself with knowledge, just so you know, if that alarm goes off, how much time do I have and what does it mean? Usually it means get the heck out of Dodge, know your escape routes. Computer hardware security. Computer hardware security is the physical security that involves protecting your endpoint hardware. Cable lock can be inserted into the security slot of a portable device to secure the device. For storage, a laptop can be placed in a safe or a vault. These can be pre-wired for electrical power as well as wired network connections. Computer systems, printers, and similar electronic devices emit electromagnetic fields, which can result in interference called electromagnetic interference, or EMI. Electromagnetic spying can be defined as picking up EMI fields and reading data that is producing them. A Faraday cage, this is actually a really cool little concept. A Faraday cage is a metallic enclosure that prevents entry or escape of an electromagnetic field. A Faraday cage can prevent electromagnetic spying and remote wiping of electronic devices. And there's actually some DIY, how to make your own home DIY Faraday cages online too, if you're ever curious about that. This is a cable lock. You will see those a lot if you work somewhere with secured networks. They use cable locks a lot. Okay, knowledge check. What can be used to secure electronic devices from electromagnetic spying and shield them from EMI? DMZ, PDS, Faraday cage, man trap. I was gonna say, we just literally went over that, so good job. Okay, so that's it for this one. Now, before I end for the day, are there any questions about the material that I went over? Any questions about anything that for the week? We're all brain dead and we all want to go. We're all done. Yeah, it's been a rough week for pretty much everyone I know. So you guys take care. Go, like I said, you're extended on your Cengage. Do what you can. Enjoy your 3-day weekend. Get your paper and your other test in. Your weekly test that's usually on Mondays is due on Tuesday, so you have an extra day for that one. You guys have a good night, okay?